Testing, testing. Yay. Not want the taskbar. Right. There. Okay. We'll wait for Father Tim, and we'll rock and roll. Rock and roll. Okay. Thank you. Get Father Tim and get rolling. I think we're just about set.
Okay, great. I'll be right on that.
Thank you. Thank you, David. You're the man. David, are we able to turn down the lights at all? That might help the projector pop a little more. Thank you. All right. All right, how's everyone doing today? Good, thank you for being here. I realize it's a choice to be here, and I am just deeply honored that you'd take the time to be here and attend these lectures. I try to keep them fun. I can't remember who all was here last time and who wasn't, so just for everybody's edification, just a few things with this. I try to teach with the following perspectives. Historiography. You're not just getting the world in history according to Dane Barnes. I'm trying to pull from primary sources. We're taking kind of an examination of sources that exist at the time and what people are saying during those times. So keep that in mind. This is not a sum total representation of every resource that exists. There may be some unintended bias that has occurred because of that. Second, I wanted to mention this as well. I didn't last time, but I think it's become more evident for me in constructing this. The other big theme is what we call big history. Big history, what does that mean? It's a model of studying history that's more fun than just cramming dates and memorizing people. It's looking at the big themes play out over time. And that's one of the things I hope you'll really notice, especially in Unit 2 here, is you'll notice big themes. You'll think, this is strange, I saw this happen before. It's happening again now. And it will. There's an old saying by Sir Edmund Burke, those that do not know history are doomed to repeat it. There's a second half that doesn't get shared, which is those that do are doomed to watch everybody else repeat it. But we'll keep that between us. All right. Now you know. So that's your dues now. That's right. History doesn't repeat, but it certainly does rhyme. And there will be a lot of rhyming in this. So I'm going to give just a little recap of what we covered in Unit 1. Again, for those that weren't here, or maybe you were, but it was a few weeks back and just want a refresher. So big theme we talked about. Oh, and lest I forget, just like Unit 1, I try to also include art history in this. I think that there's no better way to see ideas change over time than to see the material culture actually change with it. So hopefully that is positioned. So I'm going to kind of breeze through the slides that I had done last time. So we kind of started with what we called the Jesus movement. We talked about how Christianity, when it first emerges, is very much underground. It's a secretive type following because it's persecuted. So by nature of survival, people are having to practice in hidden church houses. They're having to practice in catacombs. They're really doing their best to kind of keep a low profile. And then you also have the fact that at the time that this is happening, this is all embedded within the the Hebrew culture that already exists. If you think of Peter, Peter talks about how all Christians must first be circumcised to be Christian, which is very different from what Paul has to say later. So there's very much this kind of concept of Christianity is Judaism plus. It's Judaism and more. But it's rooted in Judaism. It's not till later expansions happen that we really see it start to blow up across the world in a popular way where it becomes attracted to Gentiles. So most of these slides here, we were showing just sort of how the idea of Jesus was really different. This very first picture of Jesus we have is straight up just a Roman Jewish dude with a sheep, which is what you would expect from someone at that time. If you're saying, what does Jesus look like? This Hellenized Jew living in Roman Judea, that's probably a good indication of it. I won't dwell too much on this. Suffice to say, we took a lot of look at the continuity of how this develops, and also taking into consideration, too, that all the scriptures don't exist yet. There's scriptures that are still under publication. Some of them don't even come around till about 90 Common Era, which means that for the first 9 years, first century Christians are really operating without a complete New Testament. In fact, the New Testament doesn't become completely compiled till later. So what does that mean, right? We kind of talked about how there's even apocryphal writings that exist at the time that are not in the canonized version of the Bible. But we kind of talked about this big theme. Christians were Jews initially. But then that really starts to change. We see Christianity start to spread all across the world. We do talk about the apostles a bit. We talk about how their work is really important. We can read things like Paul's letter to Corinth. We can read, his letter to the Ephesians. We can read these things and see that there actually is evangelism happening. But when we get down to it, the biggest thing that actually contributed, in my theory at least, to the widespread growth of Christianity was actually probably the Jewish diaspora. The Roman emperor, again, Titus and Vespasian, they had enough of dealing with Jewish rebellions every 50 years in Judea. They decided that cost too much tax money. We're tired of dealing with this. I don't want to mobilize troops again, like every century. Like this is nuts. Why are we doing this? So Vespasian says, hey, I have an idea. We're just going to destroy the Temple of Jerusalem, their center worshiping place, because then they can't make rebellions there. And then, so we don't have all this insurgency fighting that we keep having happen. We're going to take Jews from Judea and we're going to forcefully migrate them into the far reaches of the empire. They'll be outside their communities and they'll have to Romanize. And that, actually, as diabolical as that is, it's actually a kind of a good plan. Except there's one thing that he doesn't realize, which is, well, there's now this secret hidden group of Christians that are now inside all these Jewish communities, and now you've just sent them all over the Roman Empire. And Christianity appeals to slaves and women, two of the biggest population groups in the Roman Empire, which means it starts to spread like wildfire. We kind of talked about how this changes. It's no longer just a Jewish religion. It's a religion for anybody. Gentiles are getting into it, people from the low and high levels of society, but of course it's still persecuted because we have the Roman imperial cult. In the Roman Empire, Caesar is not just the emperor, he is God, and you pay taxes to God. It's part of a tithe. So if you are part of a system that says there is only one God, and any other God is an imposter or is false idolatry, that creates tremendous issue. So there's tensions, there's purges. We talked about how Christians are getting killed left and right all throughout these purges. But we talk about the martyrs, about how for better or for worse, the Christians just won't go away. In fact, they're doubling down on their faith. There's this really rooted identity in surviving through persecution. Then we talk about what happens when Christianity starts to bubble up to the surface a little bit more. Because again, it's been underground, and now you have this problem that's happening where Christianity is coming to the surface and people are realizing, oh my goodness, everybody's been practicing this differently. And they're all wrong. Yes, exactly. And what do we call somebody that's wrong? We call them a heretic. That's the choice word. Somebody who isn't in the main line of orthodoxy, the right way of thinking. We talk about the early church fathers, how they are really involved in these discussions that are happening. We call this patristics. But we talk about, first we see Marcionism, this version of heresy that says, hey, we've been practicing Christianity underground too. By the way, the God of the Old Testament is actually a separate God from Jesus Christ and is the Antichrist. Have fun. Doesn't go over too well. So again, these apostolic fathers have their work cut out for them for what is basically an extreme version of first century anti-Semitism. We talk, though, about how when you have all these people coming up with these hidden secret gospels in places and saying, yeah, we're the real church because we have the real secret teachings that Jesus only taught to a select few. You gotta find it in the Christian black market to really know what's happening here. The early fathers sort of respond with, that's ridiculous. In fact, we know that there's the creation of the apostles on Pentecost Sunday. Christ founded the church. Christ created the apostles. The apostles have the most immediacy to Christ. And we know that the apostles actually laid hands on bishops, and those bishops have made bishops. And we call that apostolic succession. You can trace the lineage. How do I know your kung fu is real kung fu? Because my sifu learned from this sifu, and your kung fu is weak. All right, anyways. Same thing applies here, right? The apostolic fathers, they become really important. Constantine comes around. We talk about him. The Roman emperor, he wins a civil war, becomes the new Roman emperor. He decides to move the capital of Rome from being Ravenna. I know that's confusing. You think Rome would be the capital of Rome. It was. And then they moved it to Ravenna. And then they moved it back to Rome. And then they moved it to Ravenna. And then he moves it to a place called Byzantium and decides, you know what, that doesn't sound cool enough. I'm going to call it Constantinople after myself. It is Istanbul today. We'll get to that in a little bit. So civil war happens, but the key thing that happens for Constantine is he has this vision in which, and we wonder how much of this influence might have come from his mother Helena, because Helena was a Christian, but he has this vision that in this great battle, in this civil war, that if he paints the Chi Rho Sigma, which are the three Greek letters that spell out the name of Christ, that his troops will emerge victorious. And there's a miracle. It does. He is severely outnumbered, 4-1. And the bridge that the enemy is coming to, becoming the new Roman emperor because of it. So he says, you know what, these Christian folks, I kind of like them now, and I'm going to put forth this edict that says Christianity is now legal. And we would think that would be great, except then the emperor says, okay, we need to talk about what actually is Christianity, because if I'm going to legalize this thing, I need to know what this includes. And again, you have all these pocket groups that have been practicing underground and in different countries with no centralization whatsoever, apart from they can just trace a lineage. And they are getting into all of these disputes and arguments about what is Christianity, what is the main creed that we abide by. And that goes, over just wonderfully. These guys, remember them, they won't go away. That's a foot stop moment. You're going to see this in part 2. They won't go away. They're called Arians. They come from a fellow named Bishop Arius. Bishop Arius takes inspiration from the first anti-Semitic guy named Marcion, but then he also tries to propose that Jesus is divine, but not equally divine as God the Father, who alone is unbegotten and eternal. And you're probably scratching your head and saying, what? And what he means by this is Jesus is not divine. Jesus is not totally divine. Jesus is just the Son of God. Whereas everyone else would argue Jesus is God, just incarnate in the flesh. And by the way, there's a Trinity, and the Trinity gets established through this. He's like a demigod, basically. Anyways, Santa Claus, St. Nicholas of Myra likes that so much that he punches Arius in the middle of the debate. That's a thing that happened. He was on the naughty list. I saw a meme once with him, and it said, I came to hand out presents and punch heretics, and I'm all out of presents. We talk about St. Athanasius. If anybody ever had their work cut out for them in the church, I really think it's this man. He has to go toe-to-toe with the Arians, with all these councils, trying to be the voice of reason and actual sanity in all of this. He writes a seminal work called On the Incarnation. He really kind of develops what we have as the Nicene Creed. So when we're in church every Sunday and we're reading the Nicene Creed, after the gospel and after the sermon is provided, it goes back to this. It's the summary of what do we believe? How can we identify that we are actually, like common form or Orthodox Christians in this sort of sense? And what does it mean to have one holy Catholic and apostolic church? Well, it means to be part of one universal church that agrees by this creed and can trace their priests and bishops coming from bona fide apostles and not just Pastor Bob down the street in Nicodemia or somewhere. Orthodoxy versus Arianism, again, these guys don't go away. They come back in full force because even though they get exiled after Nicaea, Constantine dies, one of his 4 sons takes over as the empire, and he says, you know what, I actually really like these Arian Christians better. I'm going to make this the state religion instead. That, again, doesn't go over too well. Of course, look, when I say there was a civil war, you just need to understand that's just status quo for the Romans. There's never just not a civil war of some kind happening. Rome is like Game of Thrones just on steroids, But there we go. We kind of get to this idea. Things get formed, and Theodosius, one of the later Roman emperors, he ends up not just making Christianity legalized, he makes it the official state religion. So now we have this kind of weird thing that's happening where Christianity went from being this persecuted underground religion to suddenly it's now the state religion. And now you are really close to the emperor, you're getting a lot of favors. And something that kind of happens is, you remember those apostolic fathers I mentioned? They kind of talk about how, apostolic succession, that's quite significant. We actually have the authority we do because we get them from a line of bishops coming from the apostles. Well, the emperor kind of doubles down on that. He says, that's great. He's like, I like the apostle thing. We got like 5 regions in the empire. How would you like to be a regional manager from the empire, and we'll just staple being an apostle descendant onto that? And we get what's called the pentarchy. So there's 5 major metropolitan cities: Rome, Constantinople, Alexandria, Antioch, and Jerusalem. And the agreement is sort of, here's the 5 main big bishops in the church. We call them patriarchs or pontiffs. They have direct apostolic authority to be doing what they're doing, to be managing these areas, to be creating bishops. This is a very layman's version of this. Like I am really abbreviating this for the sake of time. And you can see how this sort of spreads out. Well, then we get into the ascetics. There's people that aren't happy with this, and these guys are my personal heroes. They're the ones that are saying, what the heck is happening? We used to be this religion that we're world renouncers, and we used to fight back against imperialism, and now we're endorsed by imperialism. And you know what? How about we just leave for the desert instead? I like that. So they go into the desert. They would rather quite literally renounce and reject the whole entire world just to practice Christianity the way that they felt it used to be. And this is where you get monks from. They start creating the first monasteries in the Orthodox traditions. So you do have kind of this counterculture. We talk about these councils, though, and what ultimately starts happening is the 5 patriarchs that we mentioned, they start having disagreements. There's one of them, because of course they do. One of them is Nestorius. He says, hey guys, I understand the Trinity thing. I get that. But I think Jesus was totally man and not total God. And everyone else is like, isn't that what Arius said? And he's like, no, there's a loophole here. And that, again, doesn't go over well. Nestorius gets excommunicated from the rest of the group, but there's a problem. He's still one of the patriarchs. You can't really just excommunicate a patriarch, right? So they break off. Now there's 2 orthodoxies. There's Armenian Orthodoxy, and then there's the Byzantine Orthodoxy. Well, the guy that responds to him responds full force in the other direction with Eutychism and says, well, look at you. You're such a fool. Of course Jesus isn't total man and not God. He's actually total God and not man at all. And, of course, they leave to become the Coptic Orthodox Church. My point is, now we have 3 churches when the whole point was to have one church initially, right? And there really wasn't one big church initially, really, because everything was underground and developing differently. But then, as these folks are debating with each other, we get St. Leo the Great. And he's like the tie-breaking vote. He comes in and he says, you know what, I'm going to lean this way. And everyone's like, okay, power to Rome. We need somebody to kind of manage this, because remember, there's 5 of them. So that means if 2 and 2 are against each other, he's the fifth one. He's got to pick a side. So everyone's trying to curry favor from Rome to like join my side of the argument so that I can still be in the emperor's grace and the other guy can be a heretic. So that's a very, again, simplified version of this. But the result is this St. Leo, he comes in and he does a very effective job at it. He then begins to find himself in a very powerful position. And we talk about, finally, in concluding, how if we look to some of the earliest resources, his successor, Sixtus VI, describes him as Episcoplubidae, which means bishop of the people. I mean, actually, that's where we get the word Episcopalian from, like of the people. When we talk about like an episcopal bishop in any church terms, it means like a bishop that sees to the people. So Episcopal church quite literally means church of the people in a certain sense. It is. It absolutely is. And Sixtus refers to this term, Episcoplubidae, and he gives it another term too, which is Pontifex Maximus, which is the greatest of the pontifexes, and it's the priest, it's the bishop of the people, and eventually the Italians just say, "Can we just call that Papa for short?" And so now we have this new term, which is Pope. And Saint Leo the Great in the West is known as Pope Leo I. He's really the first evidence of a person we have that is outwardly identifying as a pope. Now, if you talk to those who are Roman Catholic, they will insist that the line of popes does go all the way back to Peter, but that's because, largely, I think, the argument that Pope Leo makes. He starts to come forth and he says, by the way, I'm not just the tie-breaking vote here, I'm the first among all equals because Peter, where I trace my apostolic succession from, Jesus said he's the rock on which he'll found the church. So that means he's the first of the apostles and has primacy over all the others. Therefore, I have primacy over you. I am the vicar of Peter. And basically what happens is the Byzantine emperor gets involved. And he says, that's great. You are indeed the vicar of Peter. However, the Patriarch of Constantinople, my right-hand man, is the vicar of Christ. So please sit down and shut up. So, point being is, we talked about how you're starting to see some tension. The church is starting to proliferate in different ways. And we talked about how, from Pope Leo's perspective, there's one big thing that's in his way. And for the Coptic Pope and for the Armenian Patriarch, there's something big that's in their way. And it's the Byzantine Emperor. You have to have endorsement from the emperor to really have that much authority in the imperial lands. And they're struggling to get it. And so where we left off last time, just to finish the recap, was what could possibly happen that might change that dynamic. And of course, this is where our new presentation begins. This is the fall of Rome in 476 Common Era. That's my short, high-burst energy recap. So today we're going to really talk about the medieval church. We've made it through the first 500 years. We're going to start talking about how the church starts to change and how those divides start to become larger. So, of course, what happens? Oh, you know what? Not these Goths. The Goths come to Rome, but maybe not these ones. It's actually more these ones. 476, the last Roman emperor, Romulus Augustulus. I want to stop there for a second. You mentioned, you're talking about Istanbul, Constantinople falling. This is one of the craziest things in history to me. The founder of the Roman Empire, if you follow their legend, there's Romulus and Remus. Romulus kills Remus and forms Rome. Romulus Augustulus is the last Roman emperor in the West. The last emperor in the Byzantine Empire before it gets taken over by the Ottomans is Constantine XI. Both share the name of the first founding emperor. It's kind of, there's some, serendipity in that, I think, where it's a bit ominous. But yeah, anyways, Romulus, he gets deposed by a Germanic king named Odoacer. Rome in the West collapses due to too much political corruption. So there's a lot happening here. We'll get into that. But the main thing is the city itself gets ransacked. And all the territory in Roman lands, they get attacked by different tribes of people. The Goths, the Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals. If you've ever heard the term vandalizing something, there's a part of genetic memory of how much destruction was done to Rome that created that word from the Vandals. And these people, who are they? And this is like the image you would get from somebody like Voltaire, like these half-naked people in furs that are just, look at that. He's ripping the diadem off of a statue of the emperor, this like nearly naked, savage man. And so we're used to this term barbari, which is barbarian, and that's how the Romans think of these people. The barbarians are coming. The barbarians have sacked Rome. And you can read works by St. Augustine, and he complains about how the cradle of civilization for so long has now just been pilfered by these barbarians. But what is barbarian? What does that even mean, really? Barbari. The Romans used to, in early days, insist about how people that lived a little bit past Anatolia, their language dialect always sounded like they were saying bar, 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 bar when they were talking. So barbari became the term for those people outside the empire. But then it kind of becomes like a blanket term for basically third world country outsider compared to the empire. And I want you to look at this. These are Goths, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, Vandals, and Gauls. This is some osprey representation and illustration based on historical finds and artwork. Do those really look like barbarians to you? Are they wearing horned helmets? Are they half naked? Are they wearing furs? Are they, no, they actually look quite Roman. And that's the point I want to make here. The reason that these groups are successful in conquering Rome isn't that they're a horde of barbarians that Rome can't handle anymore. It's that they quite literally start to out-Roman the Romans. They become so good, Rome becomes just a cesspool of corruption. Anytime the military is being used, it's not being used to expand anymore. It's not being used for border patrol. It's being used for political coups, because as I said, there's always a civil war happening in Rome. It gets to the point where the praetorians, the bodyguards of the emperor, are assassinating their own emperors left and right. It really is a difficult, turbulent time. And then there's also what's called bread and circus politics. Everything goes into entertainment instead of actual functional things. Well, you have enough of this happen, and then you add that with the fact that Rome is so big that it can't handle its borders, and it doesn't have the military personnel or the funding to happen that. Meanwhile, all these other people on the outside, Gauls, Goths, Visigoths, Ostrogoths, they're kind of just looking in. They're thinking like, that aqueduct thing sounds like a good idea. I think we'll make that one of those too. And you know what? I like that you have these legions and auxiliaries. Let's do that too. And I like this too. And they keep doing this to the point that because they don't have as big of a domain to have to handle, they're able to become more efficient than the Romans. And eventually, they're able to conquer them. So Rome in the west falls. But remember, Rome isn't just Rome in the west. It's this. There's the Byzantine Empire in the east now. Rome in the west falls. The Byzantine emperor still thinks of himself as the Roman emperor. So we have an east-west split that's going to become big. And here's another problem. Remember how I told you these guys won't go away? Well, they're back. And it turns out it's the Visigoths, it's the Goths, it's the Ostrogoths, it's the Gauls, it's the Vandals, because while everything was collecting in the imperial court and orthodoxy was becoming the main form of religion in the Roman Empire, when Bishop Arius and all the Arians got exiled, where do you think they went? Well, they went to Gaul, they went to Germania, they went to the Balkans, they went to all these surrounding places in Western Europe. And so these people who are invading, that's the other thing, they're not pagan barbarians, they're Christians. They're Christians that have out-Romaned the Romans, but they have an Arian understanding of Christianity. So once again, the pontiff in Rome is realizing he has his work cut out for him again. These Arians just won't go away. And now there's hardly any protection, there's no empire here, and these Arians are running rampant. What do we do about this? And I included this just to kind of show you a little bit of the acculturation. That person in the middle being baptized is Jesus in this art. Again, beardless and very Norse-looking, but that's sort of their idea of connecting with the culture. Again, attaching to this idea that Christianity really does kind of just become a religion accepted by different cultures wherever they are, and they can kind of see Jesus within their own culture. Here's some more pictures of some of the chapels that exist that kind of capture this era of art. And again, I ask you, does this look very barbaric to you? Does this look very anti-Roman? No. If anything, it's very similar. It's very adjacent. And then here again is an interesting picture here because you have an image of Jesus that's grounded on earth that is treated almost as equal in some ways to the apostles, as opposed to the Byzantine art where he is almost constantly hovering overhead. Kind of going back to this idea that Arius had that Jesus is a semi-divine being, not a totally divine being. Yeah. Well, I think it's a dual meaning. I think it's supposed to be symbolize 4 of the archangels, but then also 4 of the apostles. And again, you just see the art as it's starting to develop. It's very Roman. It's just a different idea. And so Rome at this time actually has 2 types of Catholic churches forming. There's this Arian version, and then there's the previous Latin version. But I want to talk about how the church sort of responds to this. And the church decides we don't have the big imperial seat that we used to. We don't have the wide-reaching power. We really just need priests who are willing to travel far and wide. And this starts to sort of happen simultaneously, and we will talk a little bit more about this in detail, with the development of Western monasteries. I want to preface, you're going to hear me use the term Latin a lot. Latin refers to the West, whereas Byzantine is going to refer to the East. The term Roman Catholic Church did not quite exist yet in this time. It's actually something from the 1800s. But the Latin Church is in the West. The Desert Fathers are a few centuries before. They are definitely in the East. But there is influence to the ideas of the Archimandrites, which are these monks in the East that we mentioned. They're kind of taking the model a little bit. The Roman pontiffs are realizing we need that type of model to be effective. And actually, just for relevance to this church, I have, does anyone want to take a guess as to which 4 saints those are? Patrick, very good. Bridget, very good. Columba, very good. And Kevin. St. Kevin, yes. So you have 4 of them. But notice this is kind of an Eastern take on them rather than the very traditional, more Western take or Latin take we have on them. But they're sent out. And this is something I kind of want to posit to you. What do you suppose it means when we talk about St. Patrick driving the snakes out of Ireland? Well, a lot of people, if you ask, if they say, St. Patrick drove out the snakes from Ireland, the common misconception when people talk about that is that he drove out the pagans. He wasn't. He was driving out the Arian Christians. So all of these monks are being spread all throughout Western Europe, all these priests, to basically deal with the problem of Arianism that has run very rampant. A problem according to them, at least. I can't say I've really ever met an Arian Christian, so I can't really judge them, but I also want to show this too. Big cities are falling apart. So some of the richer people, they start putting together their estates. And you notice that they start building walls around them, and they start becoming fortified. And it's not too much longer that you start getting actual medieval feudal society as a result. You start getting your idea of like a bailey and a castle with a protected town in it. Feudal society is starting to come together. And when you have that, you need serfs, you need peasants, you need people that can maintain the agraria. And this is going to start to really influence the structure of things. Here I have a depiction of St. Benedict. The reason Benedict is going to have so much prominence is I talked about monks. In Ireland, it's really the order of Columban that's going out and doing so much proselytization. But the kind of first officially recognized monastic order amongst the Latins is the order of St. Benedict. St. Benedict of Nursia establishes his first monastery at Monte Cassino in Italy. And he drafts the Rule of Benedict, which is this rule and template for like observances that monks need to live by, ordinances for their lives. And they're used pretty much universally, copy and paste in all the other monastic orders. But it kind of changes the idea of a priest quite a bit. These monks took vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience. You couldn't have land, you couldn't have extravagant wealth, you couldn't be married, you couldn't really engage in sexual activity, and you had to be obedient to your bishops. This idea is very ascetic. It's just like the Archimandrites. The priest is no longer a very powerful political figure that's buddy-buddy with emperors and kings, and the idea of a monk is sort of a counterculture to that. It's the ascetic lifestyle of reject the material, embrace the spiritual, and be willing to follow God wherever he calls you to do this. And these monasteries become important because they become preservation of knowledge. After the Roman Empire has fallen, they're creating manuscripts. They're creating books. They're writing. They're doing calligraphy. And they're actually maintaining a lot of the rights of works like Plato, Aristotle, all these sort of things that are really important to the Roman culture. Here's sort of a template of some of these monasteries as they're developing. That's the monastery at Monte Cassino. But here's another one at Lindisfarne, which is in Northumberland in England. And I put pictures here of what's called the Book of Kells, because this is significant. What I want you to see is we kind of discussed how for the longest time there really wasn't a widespread availability of the Gospels or the New Testament. That's starting to change with these monks when they have whole monasteries with scribes that are just dedicated to actually producing manuscripts. You're still not going to have a Bible in every person's house. That's just not going to be a thing. But your local monastery might have a complete set of the Gospels. And what's better, too, is they got illustrations. Unfortunately, one of the downsides with the fall of Rome is most of society is now also illiterate, so you need pictures to kind of explain things. But that allows for some room for creativity and kind of merging with the culture. Here's, for example, from the Book of Kells, here is an image of the Theotokos with the Mother Mary with Jesus. Right? You see all this zoomorphology with the way that animals are kind of woven into the letters and things like that. We're getting very more distinctly medieval now, rather than Eastern Byzantine. But because there's never a shortage of problems for Christian people, Vikings come. Lindisfarne Abbey is interesting. It's quite literally the passage to get there is a shore that during high tide, actually the ocean will flow in and cover it, but then it will recess, and for a few brief hours of the day, you can actually cross it. So having Vikings show up on boats to that is not necessarily the best thing. And they do kind of make life miserable for everybody there. They're sacking these monasteries. They're sacking anywhere where they can really get much money or anything. Also, Vikings is not a people. I want to make that clear. Viking is a profession. You go on a Viking. You're not a Viking yourself. So these are all different types of various Scandinavian Norse tribes. Kind of on the list of people like the Ostrogoths and Visigoths in the sense that they were moved out from the steppes because of other invasions happening there with the Huns. People start to do what's called the Great Migration. They starting to move into Europe, and then they start pillaging things like this. So this is the status quo in Western medieval Europe. If you're, if you're with the Holy See of Rome, you're dealing with all sorts of pillaging happening in the north. You have constant warring tribes that, although they are very Romanized and they're making their own kingdoms, they're never in agreement about anything. And you do have the fact that the majority of all this culture is Arian Christian. Heresy, yes. So what can we do about this? And I go to the image of Pope Gregory the Great, also known as Saint Gregory. If you've heard of Gregorian monks, they come from him. Because he is one of the first pontiffs to really double down on this and say, these monks are a good thing. These monks are like our first wave of resistance in dealing with all of these problems. We can send them into violent communities and they can try to proselytize peace. We can send them into these areas where Arian Christianity is dominant, and they are actually having large yields in conversion. So that's sort of my premise here. These monastic orders, they become a very big deal. But meanwhile, that was the West, Latin. Let's talk about what's happening in the East. So in the Eastern Roman Empire, or Byzantine Empire, I want to start with this. There's a series of something that's happening that's called the Nike riots. If you've heard of Nike, like the shoe, that's actually where they get the term from. Nike, it was like an old outcry of outrage in the Byzantine Empire when they were unhappy with the emperor for some reason. The house of victory, yes. That's primarily where it comes from. So you cry victory to, yeah. The Nike riots have a lot to do with the politics and dynamics of the ruling class. Yes. And I won't go too much into the riots themselves. Suffice to say that for this figure right here, Emperor Justinian I and his wife Theodora, Empress Theodora, he needs to figure out a way really quick to get the people back on his side. And he finds a way to do this. He builds the Hagia Sophia, the largest cathedral built in the entire world up until the Florence Cathedral is constructed in the Renaissance. This starts to become the center of Christianity. Even though you have the sepulcher in Jerusalem, which is built over the tomb of Jesus and where he was crucified at Golgotha, the Hagia Sophia is in the dead center of Constantinople. I also want to mention this too. Why Constantinople? Why did Constantine bother to move the capital? Because it's right at the confluence of all the Silk Roads. All the trade comes through Constantinople from the east. This is where all the big money is happening. Constantinople is a city of massive wealth and extravagance, but it's also a city of piety. And we have, on the opposite, whereas you have sort of this localization of adoption of Christianity in the West, you have monument building happening in the East. But all of that comes with a caveat. I want you to look at this image here where you can see a bunch of Byzantine clergy. Who's in the middle? Is that Jesus? Exactly. It's not Jesus. It's not even, and I believe this individual right here is supposed to be the patriarch. But you get the idea, pretty dead center, that this is Byzantine life. It's centered around the emperor. And the right-hand man is his Greek patriarch. This is the culture that's in the East. And we start to see things start to get into the theology a bit more. I've included an image of what's called Christ Pantocrator. It's a very popular icon that starts to emerge. But it's this very imperial image of Christ. The Christ is ruler of the cosmos. Christ is a divine ruler. And you'll find, too, that there's older motifs. If you see Christ, he's holding the Gospels open. And these ones, they're shut. It's either you're in or you're out. And if you're in, you're part of the imperial Roman religion, which kind of brings up this topic again. In a sort of way, the imperial Roman cult has collectivized around Byzantine Christianity. That one, I'm actually not sure. I assume gospel, but it could be Book of Life. Regardless to say, though, that there are variations where it's either open or closed, and it represents and symbolizes this duality of being in the culture or being without, having salvation or not. So we start to see this grow on a mass scale. We start to see, the Theotokos start to be worshipped more widely. The art, just to show you some of the art of the time, how it's becoming more imperialized. This is where it gets really important, though. This is where we're talking about what causes things to split between the East and the West, apart from just cultural differences. This is where actual history starts to kick in. So this figure here is Emperor Heraclius, and he reigns as the Byzantine emperor from 610 to 641 Common Era. And he has a really enormous task that he has to address as emperor, which is this. This is a map, by the way. I've been talking about all these places. This kind of helps to visualize this. All this in purple is the Byzantine Empire. Almost all of this that's up in green up here, much of that used to be Latin Rome. The thing that he has just never, that they've always struggled with is this, right here in yellow. These are the Persians. Persians have not really been subdued since Alexander the Great. They are continuing, they call themselves the Sassanids. This is the Sassanid Persian Empire. And the Byzantine Empire is constantly at war with the Sassanids. They are the biggest rivals. In Latin Europe, you deal with Vikings. If you're in the Byzantine Empire, you're dealing with the Sassanid Empire. You're dealing with the Persians. They are constantly locked in a war with them. What? I want to say Zoroastrianism was the biggest. Mithraism specifically was pretty huge. The Sassanid Empire, and of course there's also some, I think it's more polytheistic. There's some things kind of carrying down from older Chaldean religion too. So it's not just Zoroaster. But the Sassanid Empire Here's kind of an image of them. They're the greatest rival. And they come out of the east, and these guys, they're pretty militant. Well, they end up proving effective. They manage to launch a massive campaign, and they take the city of Alexandria, and then they take the city of Jerusalem, and then they also take the city of Antioch. That's three of the most important, prominent cities in the Byzantine Empire. And if those cities are gone, then the city that's vulnerable now is Constantinople itself. And that's the one you have to protect at all costs. So Heraclius, he deals with all these offensives, and he does something. What he does is, and I need to express this, the idea of a national standing army like we have today is a very new concept. We really haven't seen that since the Roman Empire in these times, since the old Roman Empire. And even then, you had to deal with conscripts for legionaries more than not. In today's society, you have a national standing army. You have a national guard, you have a reserve. When there's a war, you just draft more people into it. There's your national army. It's always funded. It's just a question of how much funding does it have. For most of medieval Europe, that's not the case at all. You have what's called a war chest. You have this money. That's a kind of in case of emergency, break glass type case, to use this fund to hire mercenaries and soldiers of fortune and get as many of them as you can so that you can counter your rivals. Well, they really didn't, but... And anyways, Heraclius, needless to say, it's time to break the glass case. He really needs these forces because they've just lost three of their big cities. So he puts together one of the biggest Byzantine fighting forces that's ever been assembled. And he's successful. He goes back, after Constantinople is being besieged, by the way, like it's gotten to that point. He leads a counteroffensive and manages to drive the Sassanids all the way back to Nineveh in Persia. He restores Antioch, he restores Alexandria, he restores Jerusalem. So they get it back. But there's a reason I'm focusing on this event. It is a woefully underspoken subject, and it is so important because in the fascination and in the mind of the medieval person, this was, both in the East and the West, this was one of the most significant events to have historically occurred. And there's a reason for that we'll get into. So, deepening the divide. We talked about these other groups of Orthodox that exist, the Coptic Egyptians and the Nestorians, the Armenian Orthodox. Remember, they don't like the Byzantine emperor. He's not going to endorse them because they got kicked out of the council, right? So they have kind of the same struggle that Pope Leo I had, which was, how do you maintain authority without having to come toe-to-toe with the emperor? And in their case, how do you do that if you're not the tie-breaking vote? How do you do this on your own? Well, they start to say, well, that's easy. Have somebody ruling who isn't the Roman emperor. Have someone who rule that isn't the Byzantine emperor. So the controversy is when the Sassanid Empire comes and they take Jerusalem, Antioch, and Alexandria, they are immediately supported with open arms by the Copts and by the Nestorians. This really deepens the rift with the rest of the Melkites, the Greek Orthodox, because now they're saying, now we're not just ideologically opposed, you literally just supported an enemy invasion of our cities so that you could escape imperial authority. So the rift there is going to get even deeper than it's ever been. But then we get this, and this is why I focus on all this. So imagine for a second you're Heraclius. You've bankrupted the empire to save it. You broke open the war chest. You were successful. You got your cities back. You're in court and things are good. And then all of a sudden you get this mysterious letter handed to you. And it's called the Letter of Hazrat. It's a mysterious letter that arrives in his court in 628 CE. And it comes by way of the governor of Basra, and there's some local person, Dinya bin Khalif al-Kabi, that gives it to him. And he opens this letter, says, okay, Harold, what does it say? And it says, in the name of God, the Beneficent, the Merciful, from Muhammad, the slave of God and his messenger, to Heraclius, the ruler of the Byzantines. Furthermore, I invite you to Islam. Embrace Islam and you will find peace, and God will reward you twofold. However, if you turn away, you will also bear the sin of your subjects. O people of the Scripture, come to a word equal between us and you. But if they turn away, they say, bear witness that we are Muslims, those who submit to God. And Heraclius reads this, and he says something that no human is ever going to say in today's world, and says, who's Muhammad? And he tosses the letter away and says, I know what this is. This is another schism. This is whatever the Copts or the Armenians are doing. This is the recent thing they cooked up that came out of it. I don't want no part with it. And he disregards it utterly. And it ends up being one of the worst mistakes politically ever made, possibly in human history. Because what's really happened is a new religion has started. We have the rise of the Prophet Muhammad, the Mohammedan uprising. Who's Muhammad? And this is a point where I had to preface things the way I did with this previous history. Because to understand the Great Schism, to understand Christian history moving forward, it is impossible to talk about Christianity without discussing Islam. Islam is that important. Christianity starts to change around Islam. Islam changes around Christianity. Islam, what is this? What is this? The Muslim means one who submits. Submits to what? Well, start with Muhammad himself. Muhammad is a merchant. Muhammad is a merchant that lives in Mecca. Mecca is one of the big trade cities that things come through in the confluence of the Silk Roads. So I want to offer a perspective on Muhammad that you probably won't hear. Muhammad is a merchant, and he's working in Mecca. And he has travelers who come through all the time. And these are with Byzantine lands. This is neighboring Byzantine lands. That means Byzantine travelers and Byzantine merchants who are commonly passing through. With these people passing through, you meet Greek Orthodox Christians, you meet Armenian Christians, and you meet Coptic Christians. And you're hearing them argue all the time about, does Christ have two natures? If so, is he totally God and not man? Is he totally man and not God? Or is he both total God and total man? What about the Trinity? Is God both the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit? Is the Father the same as the Son? Is the Son the same as the Holy Spirit? You get the idea. These are very complex theological topics that are happening. People are discussing these things. And I mean, as modernly as you and I would talk about what we're seeing on the news, this was like the talk of the time. People love to debate these sort of subjects. My point to this is Muhammad would not have been a stranger to this. Muhammad lived in a time and in a place where this conversation would be common. Well, Muhammad's response is the Shahada. So I answer that as opposed to, is Christ a divine incarnation of God and has multiple hypostases, multiple essences? Does he have multiple dualities? Well, there's actually a simpler solution. There is only one God. There's no God but Allah, and he has one messenger. Simple. I don't want to simplify it too much. What actually happens, according to the Islam faith, is that the Prophet Muhammad, he sees a lot of the corruption that's happening in Mecca. He leaves the city, again, into the desert. That's a common theme, to dwell on the evils of society. And he goes into this cave where he has an experience of the Archangel Gabriel coming and speaking to him of the first words of what will become the Quran. And in the religious belief system of Islam, Muhammad he becomes the seal of the prophets. He becomes a new prophet to go out and sort of continue in the continuity of the Abrahamic faith. Just in the same way that Christians kind of thought of themselves originally as Jewish plus, early Muslims kind of thought of themselves as being Christians plus. The only difference is they didn't really think of Christ as being a divine incarnation of God. Christian, perhaps. However, I want to point this out. The Arians also didn't believe God that Jesus was a divine being. So are they really that different from the Arians? The Arians were certainly Christians, even if the other Christians disagreed about how Christian they were. They called themselves Christian. So there is a bit of this shared dynamic that's happening. But the point is, in a culture, in a tribe, where you're getting all these conversations about these very erroneous subjects of topic about how many forms of God does God have, how many sides of God are there, having a new religion whose central tenet is there is only one God and he has one messenger is a very popular idea at the time. It simplifies things. It's a very, very streamlined answer in a way that people can relate to. And so what happens is Islam starts to become massively popular in what is today Saudi Arabia. It starts to spread pretty dramatically quick. There's also other things that make Islam different, that make it popular. I want to show you this tapestry here. Can anyone describe to me what you're seeing? This one's also kind of rare, by the way, and I'll explain why. The writing, so you see a figure in here, and he's dressed in white robes, and he's wearing a veil over his face. This is actually the Prophet Muhammad. That's rare. You hardly ever see depictions of Muhammad, ever, in art, because they have a thing against idolatry. They believe that images can be idols, except for when the prophet is depicted this way. His face is covered. There's no human semblance or likeness. In other words, they're trying to stop people from anthropomorphizing God in a certain sense. But it kind of shows like the dynamic of the extreme that starts to change. And the sort of countercultural push that happens towards the Orthodox. The Orthodox actually start to wig out against the Latins, saying, you have too many statues, that's idolatry. And the Pope basically says, why are you thinking that? It's like, well, because the Muslims say so, because they don't have idols, and they're making us think that maybe we have too many idols and we're worshiping things in the wrong places. So that's just an example alone of how Islam is starting to enter the conversation that the East and West are happening. This is a very groundbreaking religion for its time. I won't go too much into Islam as a religion, just because I don't have the time afforded for that, but it does happen, and we need to address that this does. And we need to also address that this isn't just a religious movement, it's very much a political one too. Which, to be fair, so far everything we've discussed, that has been all of Christianity so far too, has been empire politics. So I want to say that here. I don't want anyone to think of this. We talk about Islam as expanding by conquest, but these are more political entities that have arisen and emerged from out of Islam that just happen to have that as their religion. Sorry, it looks like you had a question.
Well, yeah, I mean, just speaking of time, so now we're getting closer to the 1 hour mark.
We're almost there.
And I know that, like, with this information, there's nothing that I think any of us would want rushed. So I just wanted to get a feel, like, do we want to add an additional class? Because we can certainly do that. Or, yeah, see,
Thank you. Yes, absolutely.
I don't want this for any of this to be rushed.
Thank you. I would absolutely love to do another class. I'm almost at the ending point here, and then I can transition. So thank you. I do appreciate your time. I know this is covering 500 years of lecture in 90 minutes is a little tough, especially when there's a lot of things happening in that particular 500 years. Main gist here: there's now 4 caliphs. They're your sultans, if you will, that are leading this empire along with Muhammad. And again, what ends up happening? Remember the Sassanid Persian Empire that I mentioned? Well, I want you to think about this. Here's Persia, and here's the Byzantine Empire, and they've done this. They've hit each other hard with everything that they got. They've put all their money, they've put all their forces, which means that they're bankrupt and they don't have a standing military right now because all the mercenaries went home. So when these caliphates come, they bulldoze straight through Persia. This area down here is the Rashidun Caliphate now. You can see them in green. Byzantine Empire is in indigo. The Sasanian Empire, the Sassanids, they're in purple. They acquire all of that purple territory in the span of 2 years. So this is the Battle of Al-Qadisiyah. So again, there's just too many of them. They're too powerful. They've got way too much of a good standing army and logistics compared to the Persians, who are just burnt out from their war with the Byzantines. And at the Ctesiphon at this time is actually not Nineveh. You'd think it's Nineveh, but Ctesiphon is actually the capital of the Sassanid Empire. And that finally falls under in 637. So now you have this situation in which, imagine Heraclius' view on this. You've just fought this war with the Persians, you've gotten your cities back. You get this mysterious letter from this who knows who, almost a laughable letter saying, I'm a prophet and you need to submit. And he says, this is just some crazy, schismatic stuff. And then you blink, and 2 years later, your next door neighbor that you've been fighting with for years is now completely occupied by them. And there's word of this prophet everywhere, right? That's a cause for alarm. And if that wasn't cause for alarm enough, in the very next year, this Rashidun Caliphate pushes forward and conquers Alexandria and Jerusalem. Jerusalem has now been lost to Christian nations. It's now under Muslim occupation. The Nestorians and the Copts love that, though. And that's something that we kind of think about. We think about that having a caliph being the owner of Jerusalem would be a bad thing. For the Copts and Nestorians, and frankly, too, the Jews, this is the first time they get a break in a long time. It's sort of, oh, great, we got some better representation instead of who's just doing favors for the Byzantine emperor. But it does mean that Byzantine power in the East is starting to wane dramatically. And if that wasn't enough, just in the same way that the Roman Empire fragments into little kingdoms, the Rashidun Caliphate fragments into little caliphates. A caliph is like their version of a king. So a caliph is a kingdom. The Umayyad Caliphate is one of the most expansionistic, and they begin to invade the Iberian Peninsula. And they're clashing with who? The Visigoths. Remember those people? They were some of the ones that conquered Rome. Now they're getting conquered by the Umayyads. And Iberia is what we would call most of Spain, Portugal today. And here it is. See how much that's expanded? All that red that makes up for all the Islamic caliphates. This yellow makes up for a second Islamic caliphate. And that's the Byzantine Empire. And right here is everybody else. So you get an idea of like how much this is influencing things, right? I want to mention, it's not just all conquest. The golden age of Islam begins. And in Baghdad, they established a place called the Bait al-Hikmah, which is the House of Wisdom. They're actually restoring a lot of the Eastern Roman works that were lost. They're making advancements in medicine and science, astrology. We would not have the Renaissance without this. I just want to mention that. We would not have the Renaissance without this, because information comes back from this later on in the Crusades. We're getting to our last segment here. We have now reached a point where the Islamic Caliphate has pushed so far into what we would classically consider Europe that they're now on the border into what today is France. They're now moving into, in fact, a little bit more into what's Luxembourg. So the area that's more between France and Germany. These Umayyads are invading that far inland. We have a new tribe of people that are becoming quite popular called the Franks. And there's a very important one named Charles Martel. His name's awesome. It literally means Charles the Hammer in French. And he rallies all of these Frank tribes together. He's known as like the mayor of the palace. He's this well-respected figure of good repute. And he says, okay, we're not tolerating this. We just watched what happened to all the Visigoths. We're not going to let that happen here. And he assembles this massive fighting force, and he actually defeats the Umayyad Caliphate at the Battle of Tours in 732. It's the first time that this has happened. It's the first time that the Caliphate has been defeated. You might ask, why am I going through so much military history? And there's a bit of a map of what I'm describing. Why go through all this military history? How is that related to the church in any way? Well, it's related in 800. Charles' grandson, Charlemagne, gets crowned the Holy Roman Emperor. The Roman pontiff has found his Uno card. He has found the problem to the I don't have the support of the Byzantine emperor anymore. I'll just create a new Latin one. And so here you are. You have Charlemagne being crowned Holy Roman Emperor. And the Holy Roman Emperor is Latin Catholic. And so Latin Catholicism now is starting to take over again as the largest, most predominant religion in Western Europe. And now all of these kingdoms that you had to worry about, they're now having alliances with the Vatican, alliances with the Roman pontiff, with Pope Leo III. And that's when we get to the reign of Charlemagne himself. Charlemagne is making it happen. He is changing the face of Western Europe. All the things that we typically think about when it comes to medieval palaces or kings, or even just the classes, all right? There's those who work, those who pray, and those who fight. You have your peasant class, you have the clergy class, and you have your knights. Yes, the idea of knights actually starts with Charlemagne. And it starts with the church, too. They say, you know what? We got people just killing each other for no reason all the time over land. Why don't we create a code of ethics so there actually has to be some just cause? And also to maybe, if you beat somebody in a duel, that's good enough. You don't need to go to their house and burn it to the ground and kill their children, too. You can just, settle it on horseback in a joust or something, right? But all of this to get to here. This is what I'm working to get to, and this is our last slides. All of this culminates in the substantial difference in mass between Christianity in the East and Christianity in the West. Christianity in the West went from being the underdog and now has all the political power that it could possibly ever need. It has all the military capabilities it could ever possibly need. The Byzantine Empire has shrunk down to a fifth of its previous size, And what used to be the unified Orthodox are now multiple different Orthodox groups, several of whom are actually enjoying preferential rule to the Islamic caliphates that have occupied these territories. So finally, what this results in is what we call the Great Schism. One more schism yet to come. And this is the schism where there's been differences. The Roman West and the Byzantine East, they've had some competition for sure. The pontiffs have been standing on different ground, but now they've reached the point that they've said we're two different churches now. And so they jointly excommunicate each other, as one does. And now you have this. You have the Church of Rome and the Apostolic See. You have the Ecumenical Patriarchate of Constantinople and New Rome, because that sounds better than Old Rome. You see the Patriarchates of Antioch in the East. There's your Armenians. The Patriarchate of Alexandria and the Judge of Ecumene. That would be your Copts. So this is what the world looks like now. Christianity has grown, but it's grown alongside empires. And as the empires have changed and expanded, so has Christianity. And now, it's for the first time that we are starting to see a Christianity in full in the West that is common with what we would really call Roman Catholicism. And that's a split. That's the Great Schism. Hey, my pleasure. Thank you. I appreciate everyone's time. I know this ran a little longer than anticipated. Are there any questions? I would like to open this up to the group. If I had to. No. We'll get there quickly next session. Yeah.
I had a quick question.
Yes.
Is Antioch and Armenia the same thing?
Yes, they are. Armenians are from Antioch. This is actually something that is kind of widely misunderstood. You say Armenia and you think Russians, basically, right? Like Russians that sell AR-15s, basically. You think of weapons dealers and stuff like that because of the connotation we have with them with the Cold War. If you go to the Old City, Jerusalem, there is a Jewish quarter, there is a Christian quarter, there is a Muslim quarter, and there's an Armenian quarter. Because Armenia, in its greater sense, kind of refers to indigenous Christians to the Levant. So Armenia, it gets juxtaposed up north a little bit more into places like Antioch and Edessa because they get kicked out of the club. They kind of get kicked out of Jerusalem for a certain period of time. But yeah, the Armenians, they're definitely a huge ethnic group and a huge cultural group of early Christians and apostolic Christians to this date. Yeah. Charlemagne, yes. He didn't become a pope, and I should clarify that. I did rush through that a bit. Charlemagne, the Pope realizes that there's an issue when you have all these feuding kingdoms against each other. He can try to make alliances with them, but they're going to do things that are beneficial for them rather than the church much of the time. He realizes if there's one central person that has more sway over the smaller kingdoms, he'll get further by crowning that person as a Holy Roman Emperor. So in other words, you're not just a king, you're a king that has the direct endorsement by the Pope. And by the way, this is going to become a big issue later, because now the statement is, you're not just a king because you conquered this land or because your father was king, you're a king by divine right because God says so through the Pope. This is where you start to get your divine right of kings. And multiple popes, yes.
So it was on December 25th, is that?
Yeah, Christmas.
Was it Christmas at that time, or was it, because I know they had to choose a day to kind of worship Christ, but be secretive about it, so they chose the 25th, right?
Yeah, that's correct. That's correct. And we, in the first Unit 1 I ran, we did talk about that. So that did happen, actually, probably around the 3rd century is when that kind of occurred. But all this is happening now by Charlemagne starts to appear in 800, so 9th century.
They chose that specific day because it was
I think so. Just the idea that Christ is king and that is the coming of Christ. There's an actual song they used to sing in Charlemagne's court during the coronations, Christu vincit Christus regnum, which means Christ is king. And so it's the idea of Christ is the King of Kings, but the Pope was his vicar and he can make lesser kings with the authority of Christ. So it's all connected. But that's a great question, yes.
Any other questions for Dane at this time? Well, Dane, thanks again. It's more than just the information, it's the way that you teach the class.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.
So, yeah, we're only halfway through Christian history, so we'll have to find ways
Thank
to
you.
add more. Because I think if you're willing, man.
I'd love to, honestly. I'd be happy to do it. My original thought was I could probably fit the next 500 years into the next session, since that's been the trend so far. And that should take us to the greater